So currently we're using the Google font, and that's a font that's hosted by Google. So what happens if you want to use a different font? Maybe we want to kind of download one from somewhere else. Say we find a kind of nice one on Type Party, or we find one in a newsletter for fresh fonts, or we buy one from somewhere like Type. How do we use those in our project? Well, usually they will give you a file to download or some instructions if it's self-hosted like the Google Fonts one. So what actually is going on in this Google Fonts? Well, if we quickly go to this @import thing, notice there's a URL in here. So if I just quickly take this and copy and paste that into a URL, you'll see that it adds some CSS to our project. Now, of course, we don't need to worry about this. Ours is going to be a lot simpler than this, but we can see here, this is just CSS that's added to our project. So let's say that I go through something like Type Party and I'm like, oh, this is an interesting tweet. I really like this font, and I click here. Oh, maybe we should use something like Inter in our project instead. So how do we do that? Well, I click download, and then I get a file that downloads. Now, I've just got this already, so I'm just going to close this. But if we open our project assets folder again, notice that I've got all of these Inter projects in here. So these Inter files in here. How do we use them in our project? So let's say I want to use Inter in this project. It's not something that's hosted by someone else. We want to put it on our own project. One thing to kind of bring in here is licensing as well. Just make sure that you have a license to use this font. You can't just download any font from the internet and then just use it in your projects. You have to make sure that you're allowed to use it. So first thing we're going to do is basically add our files to our project, just like we did with our background.image. Which ones do we want to use? Well, in here, you might notice there's different types of files. There's one called WOF2 and one just called WOF or WOF1. So maybe you want to use a few of these. So I'm going to use interbold in WOF and WOF2. I'm going to add this to my project. And here we go. It should upload. There it is. And maybe you want to use the kind of regular weight as well. So down here, there's inter regular. I'm going to add this to my project as well. There we go. So I'm adding inter to my project. Now, the issue that I've got is if I just write inter into my style.css right now, it won't work. And the reason for that is my project doesn't know about these files, just in the same way my project didn't know about my background.jpg being the background of the page. So we want to kind of set this up in the same way. Now, here it kind of gives me some instructions, which I've just closed. We'll talk about this, how to add them in. So the first thing I'm going to do is going to get rid of this @import. We're not using Fira code anymore. We want to use inter. So what I'm going to do is add some code for self-hosted fonts. So we're hosting the fonts this time. We're not importing them. We're going to use something that looks like this into our project. So the first thing we're going to do is write an @ and then font-face. So when we use an @ in CSS, this is kind of like an instruction. It's not selecting a tag, it's an instruction to CSS. So in here, what we want to do is we want to run some code with some curly brackets. What code do we want to run? Well, here what I want to run is, I want to add one of these files or two of these files or four of these files to my project. So what do we want to call this font is the first question. We can call it whatever we want. It could be called Rick's font, it could be Supai, Mono, whatever we want to call it. I'm going to call this font-family, unsurprisingly, Inter, because that's the name of the font. But at the moment, of course, if I just use font family Inter on my page, we won't actually get this pulled in because there isn't a file to pull in yet. Underneath here, what we're going to say is source. Where is this source? Where does this font live? And I'm going to use a colon and a semicolon. And in here, I'm going to write URL and then round brackets. So round brackets just means where this URL is. Where is this URL? Well, mine's called inter-regular.wof2. Now, wof2 is the newest version of the wof font file. So it's a web kind of font is kind of how we want to think about it. If the browser can't support wof2, we want to fall back to wof1. So here we're going to put in a comma for URL and then again, brackets and inter-regular.wof. So if I can't use this file, go back to this one. So now what I'll see on my site is I have Inter used. So Inter here and Inter up here. Now, one thing you might notice is we've got Inter bold in here as well. Now, I've got my font weight as 700 in here. So how is this being bold? Well, if we don't have this file, basically the browser will make it up. It's not actually the right font face in here. So what we need to do is install our Inter bold WOF 2 and WOF 1. So underneath there, I've got my Inter file again, but I want a heavier weight. So now I want to use another font face. So at font face and then curly brackets. I've got my font family. Again is Inter. I'm still using the same typeface across all of this. But now I want to make this file the bold one. But there is a difference because what I want in here is the regular one, but I want Inter at 700 to be the bold. So I'm going to add one more thing, the font weight of 700. And under here, I can pull in the source being, unsurprisingly, URL Inter-bold, WOF 2, and here, Inter-bold, WOF 1, let's call it. So what we have now is the font family of Inter having two weights to this. We've got the regular and bold weight. Just for clarity, what I'm also going to do is font weight 400. So if I'm just scanning up the page, I can see if this is 400 or 700 in here. So what I should see now is this is the correct font. So what I want to do in case I want to use, say, italic, if I wanted to use italic in here as well, all I need to do is font style italic. So if it's 700 and italic, then I'd pull in a different font, maybe Inter bold italic. But here, what I want to use is just 700 and 400. So now what I've done is install a font from somewhere I've downloaded, installed it into my project, and added at font face. So generally, there's two ways to install a web type. One is it's hosted somewhere else like Google Fonts. Follow the instructions on what that host tells you to. The other one is you get a download and you can add it to your project in this way.